My girlfriend cheated on me with her work husband, who she swore was just a friend. I found the hotel receipt in her gym bag while looking for my phone charger. Room 614 at the Riverside Grand. 2 nights. $340 charged to a card I didn't recognize. Natalie's gym bag smelled like lavender and lies, and I stood there in our bedroom holding that receipt like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. It didn't. The date was from last weekend when she told me she was at a leadership retreat 2 hours north. The hotel was 15 minutes from our apartment. I'd been with Natalie for 3 years, living together for 18 months in a decent 2-bedroom place near the university where I taught literature. She worked in corporate marketing at Brennan Industries, one of those mid-sized tech companies that acted like they were changing the world by selling productivity software. I met her at a friend's barbecue, and she laughed at my jokes about Hemingway and seemed genuinely interested when I talked about my dissertation. She was ambitious and driven, always talking about climbing the corporate ladder and making director before 30. I loved that about her. I loved that she had goals. Her work husband entered our lives about 8 months ago, Colin from the sales team. Natalie started mentioning him constantly after they got paired on some big client pitch. Colin said this funny thing in the meeting. Colin brought donuts for the team. Colin helped her prepare for her presentation. I didn't think much of it at first because Natalie had work friends and I had colleagues I grabbed drinks with sometimes. But then Colin started appearing in our actual life. He texted her during dinner. He called on weekends about work emergencies that somehow always required hour-long conversations. When I suggested she set some boundaries, Natalie said I was being insecure and Colin was just a friend, and work-friend dynamics were different than I understood since I worked in academia. The receipt sat on our dresser for 2 days while I decided what to do with it. Natalie came home from work both nights cheerful and normal, kissing me hello and asking about my day and complaining about traffic. She didn't act guilty. She didn't seem nervous. On the 3rd night, I asked her about the leadership retreat. She gave me the same story she'd told before. Mountain lodge, team-building exercises, awful conference room coffee, early mornings and late nights of strategic planning sessions. She even showed me photos on her phone of generic conference rooms and catered lunch spreads that could have been from anywhere. I didn't mention the receipt. I wanted more information first. I called my friend Leo, who worked in private investigation, after leaving the police force 5 years ago. We'd been roommates in grad school before he decided academic life wasn't for him and joined the force instead. Leo ran his own small firm now, mostly insurance fraud and cheating spouses. He met me for coffee on Thursday morning between my classes. I showed him the receipt and told him about Colin and the constant texting and the weekend calls. Leo listened without interrupting, taking notes on his phone. When I finished, he looked at me with this expression that made my stomach drop because I recognized pity when I saw it. Leo said he'd look into it discreetly. He said he needed a few days to establish patterns and gather information. He asked for Natalie's work schedule and Colin's last name and any other details I could provide. I gave him everything. I felt sick doing it, like I was betraying Natalie by investigating her, but that receipt kept burning a hole in my brain. $340 for 2 nights at a hotel, 15 minutes from our apartment during a retreat that supposedly happened 2 hours north. The math didn't work, no matter how I tried to make it work. Natalie's behavior didn't change. She stayed late at work 3 nights that week, texted Colin constantly, and seemed genuinely happy when she was home. We watched movies on the couch. We had dinner with my parents on Saturday. She laughed at my dad's terrible jokes and helped my mom with the dishes, and acted like everything was completely normal. I kept waiting for guilt to show on her face or nervousness in her voice, but she was just Natalie, the woman I'd been planning to propose to before I found that receipt. Leo called me the following Wednesday and said we needed to meet. His voice had that careful, neutral tone that cops use when they're about to deliver bad news. We met at his office, a small suite in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation place. Leo had photos spread across his desk when I walked in. Natalie and Colin leaving Brennan Industries together. Natalie and Colin having lunch at a cafe downtown. Natalie and Colin entering the Riverside Grand through a side entrance. Time stamps on everything. Dates going back 6 weeks. I sat down hard in the chair across from Leo's desk and tried to process what I was seeing. Leo pushed a folder toward me and said there was more. Security footage he'd obtained from a contact at the hotel showed Natalie and Colin checking in together on 4 separate occasions over the past 2 months. Always weekday afternoons. Always checking out the same evening or the next morning. Leo had credit card records that showed Colin paid for the rooms. He had text message metadata that showed hundreds of messages between their phones daily, including late-night exchanges when Natalie was supposedly asleep next to me. The room felt too small and too bright. Leo kept talking about evidence and documentation and how he could get more if I needed it, but I couldn't focus on his words. I kept staring at this one photo of Natalie and Colin walking into the hotel. She was smiling up at him the way she used to smile at me. Her hand was on his arm. They looked like a couple. They looked happy. I asked Leo how much I owed him, and he said we'd settle up later, and right now I should go home and figure out what I wanted to do next. I didn't go home. I drove to campus and taught my afternoon seminar on 20th century American fiction like a robot going through motions. My students probably thought I was having an off day. One of them asked if I was feeling okay, and I said I was fine, just tired. After class, I sat in my office and stared at the folder Leo had given me. Inside were printed photos, a timeline document, and a flash drive with additional evidence. Everything organized and labeled like a legal case file, which I guess it basically was. My office phone rang, and I saw it was Iris calling from the department office down the hall. Iris worked as the administrative coordinator for the English department, handling scheduling and paperwork, and somehow keeping track of 40 professors and their various academic dramas. We'd become friends over the past 2 years through daily interactions and shared lunch breaks. She knew about Natalie and had met her at a few department events. Iris asked if I was still in my office because she had some forms I needed to sign. I said yes, and she appeared in my doorway 3 minutes later, holding a folder that had nothing to do with why she'd actually come. Iris took one look at my face and closed the door behind her. She sat down in the chair across from my desk and asked what was wrong. I'd been holding everything together for a week, playing normal, pretending I didn't know what I knew. But something about Iris asking with genuine concern made it all crack open. I told her everything. The receipt, Leo's investigation, the photos, the hotel visits, Colin, all of it. Iris listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said the most Iris thing possible, which was that she was sorry, and this was awful, and did I need help with anything practical. I appreciated that about Iris. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me everything would be okay. She asked what I needed. I said I didn't know yet. I said I was still processing. Iris nodded and said whenever I figured it out, she was available. She mentioned that her brother was a divorce attorney if I needed a referral, which felt premature since Natalie and I weren't married, but I appreciated the offer anyway. Iris left, and I sat in my office until the building security guard knocked and said he was locking up for the night. I got home around 8, and Natalie was already there, cooking pasta in the kitchen. She called out that dinner would be ready in 10 minutes and asked how my day was. I said it was fine, and went to the bedroom to change. The receipt was still on my dresser where I'd left it days ago. Natalie hadn't noticed it, or hadn't acknowledged noticing it. I picked it up and carried it to the kitchen. Natalie was draining pasta at the sink and humming something under her breath. I put the receipt on the counter next to the stove and asked what it was. Natalie glanced at it, and her face didn't change. She said it must have gotten mixed up with her stuff somehow and she didn't recognize it. I asked her to look again. She picked it up, studied it for maybe 5 seconds, then shrugged and said she really didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was from one of her co-workers and got left in her gym bag after they worked out together. Her explanation was casual and unconcerned, which made my hands shake because she was lying directly to my face without even pretending to be nervous about it. I told her the receipt was from the weekend of her leadership retreat. Natalie's expression shifted slightly, like she was recalibrating. She said the retreat was at a different hotel, and this must be from some other trip she couldn't remember right now. She had a lot of work travel. Things got mixed up. She asked why I was interrogating her about a random receipt. I didn't answer. I just watched her face and saw her deciding how to play this. She decided on irritation. She said I was acting paranoid, and she didn't appreciate being accused of something based on a piece of paper that could have come from anywhere. We ate dinner in silence. Natalie tried to make conversation about her day and some project at work, but I gave one-word responses until she gave up. After dinner, she went to take a shower, and I sat on the couch with Leo's folder open on my lap. I looked through every photo again. Timestamps and locations and irrefutable evidence that my girlfriend of 3 years was sleeping with her work husband while telling me I was paranoid for being concerned about their friendship. The next morning, I called in sick to work and waited for Natalie to leave for her job. She kissed me goodbye and told me to feel better and said she'd pick up soup on her way home. The door closed behind her, and I immediately called Leo. I told him I needed everything he had. Every photo, every piece of documentation, every shred of evidence. Leo said he'd compile it all and have it ready by end of day. He asked what I was planning to do, and I said I didn't know yet, but I needed to have all the information before I made any decisions. Iris texted me around 10, asking if I was okay since I'd called in sick. I told her I was fine, just needed a day. She responded immediately and said her offer from yesterday still stood if I needed anything. I thanked her and sat in my apartment surrounded by evidence of betrayal and tried to figure out my next move. I could confront Natalie directly with the photos, but she'd already proven she'd lie to my face about the receipt. I could just leave, pack my stuff, and walk out. But we'd signed a lease together, and I'd need to figure out logistics. I could expose everything publicly, but that felt messy and destructive in ways I wasn't sure I wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Natalie saying she missed me and hoped I felt better soon. 20 minutes later, another text came through, and I saw it was actually meant for someone else. The message said, "Can't wait to see you later, thinking about last night," with a heart emoji. I watched my screen and waited. 30 seconds passed before a follow-up text came through saying, "Sorry, wrong person, feel better." I didn't respond. I just added a screenshot to the growing collection of evidence. Leo called that afternoon and said he'd finished the comprehensive report. He'd documented 12 separate hotel visits over 3 months, hundreds of texts between Natalie and Colin's phones, credit card receipts from romantic restaurants, and even testimony from a hotel employee who recognized them as regulars. Leo had put together a timeline showing Natalie's claimed work schedule versus her actual movements based on security footage and GPS data from her phone that he'd obtained through sources I probably didn't want to know about. The report was 60 pages long and left absolutely no room for doubt or alternative explanations. I picked up the report from Leo's office and drove to campus, even though I wasn't teaching that day. Iris was in the department office and I knocked on her open door. She looked up from her computer and immediately knew something was wrong. I asked if she had a few minutes and she said of course, and closed her office door. I showed her the full report, every page of documentation that Leo had compiled. Iris read through it methodically, her expression getting harder with each page. When she finished, she looked at me and said she was so sorry, and what was I going to do? I told her I wanted to confront Natalie with everything, but I also wanted witnesses and documentation of her reaction. Iris thought for a moment, and then said her brother the attorney would probably advise recording the confrontation for my own protection. She said I should check local laws about recording conversations, but in our state only one party needed to consent, and I would be that party. Iris offered to be present as a witness if I wanted someone there. I hadn't considered having a witness, but the idea made sense. I didn't trust Natalie not to lie about what was said or twist things around later. I spent that evening preparing. I set up my phone to record audio and tested it several times to make sure it worked. I organized the photos and documents in chronological order. I planned what I wanted to say. Natalie came home at her usual time with soup from my favorite restaurant and asked how I was feeling. I said I was better and we needed to talk. She sat down on the couch next to me looking concerned and asked what was wrong. I pressed record on my phone and placed Leo's folder on the coffee table between us. I told Natalie I knew about Colin. I knew about the hotels. I knew about the lying. I watched her face cycle through emotions: surprise, confusion, denial, calculation. She asked what I was talking about, and I opened the folder to the first page of photos. Natalie and Colin entering the Riverside Grand. Timestamp clearly visible. Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. She said it wasn't what it looked like. They'd gone to the hotel for a work meeting because the office conference rooms were all booked. I flipped to the next photo showing them leaving the hotel 6 hours later. Then the next one from a different date. Then the credit card receipts. Then the text messages. Natalie's denials got weaker with each piece of evidence. She tried saying the photos were taken out of context. She tried saying Colin was just a friend and sometimes they needed private space to work on sensitive projects. She tried saying I was crazy for having her followed. I let her talk until she ran out of explanations, and then I asked her directly if she'd been sleeping with Colin. The silence that followed answered everything. Natalie finally said yes, but it didn't mean anything. It was just physical stress relief from work pressure. It didn't affect her feelings for me. She loved me and wanted to stay together and we could work through this. I asked how long. She said a few months. I showed her the timeline from Leo's report documenting hotel visits going back 5 months. Natalie got angry then and said I had no right to invade her privacy like this. She said hiring a private investigator was a violation of trust. I pointed out that she'd been cheating on me for 5 months and lying about it constantly, so trust wasn't exactly something she got to claim anymore. Natalie started crying and said she'd made a mistake and she was sorry, and she'd end things with Colin immediately if I'd just forgive her. I told her I was done. I wanted her out of the apartment. Natalie said both our names were on the lease, and she had as much right to be there as I did. I said fine, then I'd leave, but I wanted her to know that everyone was going to find out what she'd done. Natalie's tears stopped immediately, and she asked what I meant. I told her I had documentation of everything, and I planned to send it to her HR department at Brennan Industries since she and Colin had been conducting an affair on company time using company resources. I also planned to tell our mutual friends and our families exactly why we were breaking up. Natalie's face went from sad to furious in seconds. She said if I did that, I'd ruin her career. She said Colin was married and this would destroy his family. She said I was being vindictive and cruel. I asked if she'd thought about any of those consequences when she was sleeping with him. Natalie said I was supposed to love her, and loving someone meant protecting them, even when they made mistakes. I laughed at that and said loving someone meant being faithful to them, which she'd failed at for 5 months straight. I told her she had until the end of the week to figure out living arrangements, and I stopped the recording on my phone. I sent the audio file to my email immediately and forwarded it to Iris as a backup. Natalie was still sitting on the couch crying and saying this wasn't fair when I grabbed my laptop and some clothes and left. I drove to a hotel across town, not the Riverside Grand because I never wanted to see that place, and checked in for the night. Iris texted asking if I was okay, and I said I'd confronted Natalie and left the apartment. Iris responded that I could stay at her place if I needed somewhere besides a hotel. She had a guest room and it was no trouble. I appreciated the offer but said I needed space to think, and the hotel was fine for now. The next morning, I called Brennan Industries and asked to speak with someone in human resources. The receptionist transferred me to Amanda Price, who introduced herself as the HR director. I told Amanda I had information about 2 of her employees conducting an inappropriate relationship that involved misuse of company time and resources. Amanda's tone became very professional and careful. She said she'd need to take my statement officially, and could I come to the office that afternoon? I said yes, and she scheduled me for 2 o'clock. I showed up at Brennan Industries with copies of Leo's complete report, photos, timeline, and hotel receipts. Amanda Price met me in a conference room with another HR representative named David Chen taking notes. I walked them through everything methodically: the affair timeline, the hotel visits during work hours, the text messages sent using company phones, the expense reports I'd noticed in Colin's documentation that seemed to disguise personal charges as business expenses. Amanda's expression stayed neutral throughout my presentation, but David's eyes got wider with each piece of evidence. Amanda asked if I'd be willing to provide sworn testimony if the company needed it for their internal investigation. I said yes. She asked if I had any other documentation beyond what I'd provided. I said the private investigator who compiled the report could provide additional evidence if needed. Amanda thanked me for bringing this to their attention and said they'd be conducting a full investigation. She couldn't tell me what actions the company would take, but she assured me they treated these matters seriously. David asked for my contact information and said someone might reach out for follow-up questions. I left Brennan Industries feeling strange. I'd just potentially destroyed Natalie's career, but she'd destroyed our relationship first, so the symmetry felt almost appropriate. My phone had 17 missed calls from Natalie and a dozen text messages ranging from apologetic to furious. The most recent one said, "What did you do?" I didn't respond. I drove back to my hotel and lay on the bed staring at the ceiling trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Iris called around 6 and asked if I wanted to get dinner. She said I probably shouldn't be alone right now, and she knew a quiet restaurant where we could talk without running into anyone we knew. I met her at an Italian place on the east side of town. Iris was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table away from the main dining area. She hugged me when I sat down and asked how I was holding up. I told her about the HR meeting and the evidence I'd provided. Iris nodded and said Natalie was probably panicking about now. We ordered food, and Iris told me about her brother's advice regarding the apartment lease. Apparently, I could potentially break the lease early based on domestic circumstances, or I could stay and force Natalie to leave since she'd violated the relationship that formed the basis of our cohabitation agreement. It all sounded complicated and legal. Iris said her brother would consult with me for free if I wanted to discuss options. I said I'd think about it. Right now, I just wanted to get through the next few days. Iris changed the subject and told me about a department meeting I'd missed that devolved into chaos over copy machine budget allocations. She made it funny and absurd, and for 20 minutes I forgot about Natalie and Colin and hotel receipts and HR investigations. We finished dinner, and Iris asked again if I wanted to stay at her place instead of the hotel. She said it seemed wasteful to pay for a room when she had perfectly good guest space. I accepted this time because she was right, and also because the hotel was depressing and reminded me I didn't have a home anymore. Iris's apartment was in a complex near campus, a 2-bedroom with plants everywhere and bookshelves covering most of the wall space. She showed me the guest room, which had a comfortable bed and its own bathroom. She said to make myself at home and help myself to anything in the kitchen. I thanked her for the hospitality, and she waved it off saying this was what friends did. I set up my laptop and spent the evening researching tenant rights and lease break clauses until my brain hurt too much to process more legal language. Friday afternoon, my phone rang from an unknown number. I answered, and a woman identified herself as Jennifer Torres, a journalist for the local business newspaper. She said she was researching a story about workplace ethics at Brennan Industries and had heard I might have relevant information. I asked how she got my number, and Jennifer said a source at the company had provided it. I told her I'd already given my statement to HR and didn't have anything to add. Jennifer said she understood, but if I changed my mind, the public deserved to know about corporate cultures that enabled inappropriate relationships between employees. I hung up and immediately called Amanda Price at Brennan Industries. She didn't sound surprised when I told her about the journalist. Amanda said the company was conducting its investigation, and sometimes these things attracted media attention. She said I wasn't obligated to speak with reporters, and she'd recommend I didn't comment publicly while their internal process was ongoing. I agreed and thanked her for the heads up. Amanda said they'd identified several policy violations during their preliminary review and would be taking appropriate action. She couldn't provide details, but I should expect the situation to be resolved within a week. Natalie showed up at Iris's apartment on Saturday morning. I don't know how she found me there, but she knocked on the door at 8 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept in days. Iris answered the door and politely but firmly told Natalie I didn't want to see her. Natalie tried to push past, and Iris physically blocked the doorway. Natalie said this was between us, and Iris needed to mind her own business. Iris said I was staying in her home, which made it very much her business, and if Natalie didn't leave immediately, she'd call the police for trespassing. I listened to this exchange from the guest room. Part of me wanted to talk to Natalie and hear whatever explanation or apology she'd prepared. The larger part knew there was nothing she could say that would change anything. I heard Natalie's voice getting louder, saying she'd lost her job because of me, saying Colin's wife had filed for divorce, saying I'd ruined multiple lives over a mistake. Iris's voice stayed calm and said Natalie had ruined her own life through her own choices. Then I heard the door close and Iris came back down the hall looking annoyed. Iris asked if I was okay, and I said yes. She said Natalie seemed unhinged, and maybe I should document that visit in case things escalated. I added a note to my phone with the date and time and what had been said. Iris made coffee, and we sat in her kitchen while she told me her brother had sent over some preliminary paperwork for lease termination. Apparently, Natalie getting fired from her job created financial circumstances that might allow me to break the lease without penalty. I'd need to provide documentation to the landlord, but it was possible. Monday morning, I went back to campus and tried to resume normal life. My department chair asked how I was doing, and I gave vague responses about personal issues being worked out. Several colleagues had apparently heard rumors that Natalie and I broke up, but no one knew details. Iris had been discreet. I taught my classes and held office hours and pretended everything was fine. Between classes, I checked my email and found a message from Amanda Price requesting a follow-up meeting. I met with Amanda and David again on Monday afternoon. They'd completed their investigation and found that Natalie and Colin had violated multiple company policies, including inappropriate use of company time, inappropriate workplace relationships, falsification of expense reports, and breach of professional conduct standards. Both employees had been terminated effective immediately. Colin's wife had been contacted as part of the investigation after they discovered he'd charged several hotel rooms to his company card. Amanda said Brennan Industries was implementing new ethics training and policy reviews to prevent similar situations in the future. I asked if Natalie knew I'd been the one to report them. Amanda said the company hadn't revealed their source, but Natalie could probably figure it out. She advised me to document any contact from either Natalie or Colin and report anything threatening to the police immediately. I thanked her for handling the situation professionally and left feeling vindicated, but empty. Natalie had lost her job and her reputation, Colin had lost his job and his marriage, and I'd lost a relationship I'd thought was building toward something permanent. Nobody won. That evening, Natalie's mother called me. We'd always gotten along well, and her voice was sad when I answered. She said Natalie had told her we broke up, but hadn't explained why. She asked what happened. I told her the truth, all of it. Natalie's mom was quiet for a long time, and then said she'd suspected something was wrong when Natalie kept canceling family dinners to work late. She said she'd raised her daughter better than this, and she was sorry I'd been hurt. She asked if there was any chance we could work things out, and I said no, this wasn't something I could forgive. Natalie's mom said she understood, and she hoped I found happiness with someone who deserved me. I spent the next few weeks establishing new routines. I signed a new lease on a one-bedroom apartment closer to campus. I moved my stuff out of the old place while Natalie was supposedly at her parents' house, though I hired movers to help, so I wouldn't have to face the apartment alone. Iris helped me pack and organize and made the whole process less miserable than it could have been. She brought wine and pizza and made jokes about my terrible book collection, which was mostly classic literature and critical theory that she found pretentious. The semester continued, and I threw myself into teaching and research. My students probably benefited from the distraction because I prepared lessons more thoroughly and graded papers more carefully. Iris and I developed a routine of having lunch together most days, and sometimes dinner when neither of us felt like cooking alone. She told me about her terrible dating app experiences, and I told her about my process of figuring out how to be single again after 3 years. It felt easy and comfortable in ways my relationship with Natalie never had. I ran into Colin's ex-wife at a coffee shop 6 weeks after everything imploded. I recognized her from photos Leo had shown me during the investigation. She recognized me too somehow and approached my table. She introduced herself as Margaret and asked if we could talk for a minute. I said sure, and she sat down across from me looking tired but determined. Margaret said she wanted to thank me for exposing the affair because she'd suspected for months, but Colin had convinced her she was paranoid. She said finding out through her husband's HR department was humiliating, but it was better than continuing to be lied to. Margaret told me Colin had moved out and their divorce was proceeding. She'd gotten a good attorney and was taking him for everything she could get. She said Natalie had tried to contact her to apologize, and Margaret had blocked her number. She didn't want apologies from people who'd participated in destroying her marriage. I told Margaret I was sorry she'd been caught in the fallout. She said it wasn't my fault, and she hoped I was doing okay. We talked for another 20 minutes about betrayal and recovery and moving forward. When she left, I felt oddly better, like I wasn't alone in dealing with this specific kind of damage. 3 months after finding that hotel receipt, I was genuinely okay for the first time. I'd settled into my new apartment. My classes were going well. I'd started running again and lost the weight I'd gained from stress eating during the investigation. Iris and I had become genuinely close friends, the kind where we could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours about nothing important. She knew everything about the Natalie situation and never made me feel pathetic for staying as long as I had. One Friday evening, Iris and I were at her apartment watching some documentary about art forgers when she asked if I'd ever thought about dating again. I said I'd thought about it but hadn't felt ready to actually do anything about it. Iris said that was reasonable, but also 3 months was long enough to wallow, and maybe I should consider putting myself out there. I asked if she was speaking from experience, and she said yes. She'd wallowed for 6 months after her last relationship ended and regretted wasting that time. I asked Iris what happened in her last relationship. She'd never mentioned it before, and I'd never asked. She said she dated a guy named Ryan for 2 years, who seemed perfect on paper, but turned out to be emotionally unavailable and commitment-phobic. She said she spent too long trying to fix something that was fundamentally broken, instead of walking away when the red flags first appeared. I said that sounded familiar, and she laughed and said most relationship failures followed similar patterns. Iris shifted on the couch to face me and said she had a confession. She said she'd had feelings for me for over a year, but never said anything because I was with Natalie. She said she'd watched me make excuses for Natalie's behavior and ignore obvious problems, and it killed her not to say something. She said helping me through the investigation and breakup was bittersweet, because she was glad to be there for me but sad about the circumstances. Then she asked if I'd ever thought about her that way. I told Iris I'd been thinking about her that way for the past month, but didn't want to be the guy who jumped from one relationship to another without processing what went wrong in the first one. I said I valued our friendship too much to risk ruining it by moving too fast. Iris said she appreciated that, but also, life was short, and sometimes the right person was there in front of you the whole time, and you just needed to wake up and see it. I recognized those words from my own thoughts about how I'd missed obvious signs with Natalie. I asked Iris if she was sure about this. She said she'd been sure for a year, and waiting a little longer wouldn't change anything. I leaned over and kissed her, and it felt completely different from kissing Natalie. It felt like coming home, instead of trying to hold together something that was falling apart. We spent the rest of the evening talking about what this meant and how to move forward. Iris said she didn't want to be a rebound, and I promised her she wasn't. She was the person who showed up every single day when everything fell apart. She was the person who helped me move forward instead of staying stuck. 6 months after finding the receipt, Iris and I were officially together. We'd taken things slowly, dating properly instead of rushing into living together or making big declarations. My colleagues at work were surprised but supportive. Iris's friends said they'd been waiting for us to figure it out for months. My parents met Iris, and my mom pulled me aside afterward to say she liked her much more than Natalie. She said Iris seemed genuine and kind, and like she actually cared about making me happy instead of just keeping me around. I heard through mutual friends that Natalie was working retail and living with her parents. Colin had moved to another state to escape his ex-wife and his reputation. Brennan Industries had used their case as an example in updated ethics training about why workplace relationships needed proper disclosure and boundaries. The journalist who'd called me never published her story, though I didn't know why. My life had moved forward in ways I couldn't have imagined when I was standing in my bedroom holding that hotel receipt, trying to understand how everything went so wrong. Iris and I were having dinner at her apartment on a Saturday night when she asked if I ever regretted exposing everything instead of just walking away quietly. I thought about it and said no. Natalie and Colin had made choices that had consequences. I'd just made sure those consequences actually happened, instead of letting them continue their affair without accountability. Iris said she admired that I'd stood up for myself instead of accepting being treated badly. She said a lot of people would have just left and tried to forget about it. I told Iris the truth, which was that I'd been that person for months before finding the receipt. I'd accepted Natalie's explanations about Colin being just a friend. I'd believed her when she said I was being insecure. I'd convinced myself that work relationships were different, and I didn't understand because I worked in academia. Finding that receipt didn't make me suddenly brave or principled. It just finally gave me proof that my instincts had been right all along, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Iris reached across the table and took my hand. She said everyone ignored red flags sometimes because admitting the truth meant accepting painful reality. She said the important part was that I'd eventually seen clearly and acted on it. She said she'd watched me go from being someone who made excuses for bad treatment to someone who demanded better, and that growth mattered more than how long it took. I squeezed her hand and said she'd been a huge part of that change by showing me what a healthy relationship looked like. A year after finding the receipt, I proposed to Iris at the same coffee shop where I'd met Colin's ex-wife. It seemed fitting somehow, that place of unexpected connection and mutual understanding. Iris said yes before I finished asking. We planned a small wedding for the following summer with just close friends and family. My parents were thrilled. Her brother said he'd never seen her this happy. My department chair joked that I'd finally figured out what took everyone else 5 minutes to notice. The night before our wedding, Iris's brother pulled me aside and said he had something to tell me. He'd been the source who gave my name to Jennifer Torres, the journalist. He'd worked with her on another story and thought Brennan Industries' toxic workplace culture deserved exposure. Jennifer had decided not to publish after her editor determined the story was too focused on individual behavior rather than systemic problems. But Gregory said he didn't regret trying because companies like Brennan needed accountability. I told Gregory I appreciated what he'd tried to do, even if it didn't result in a published story. The HR investigation had been enough. Natalie and Colin faced real consequences. The company updated their policies. Sometimes justice didn't need to be public to be meaningful. Gregory smiled and said I was exactly the kind of person his sister deserved. Someone who wanted accountability, but didn't need revenge. Someone who moved forward instead of staying stuck in anger. Standing at the altar the next day, watching Iris walk toward me, I thought about that hotel receipt and how it changed everything. Finding it had destroyed my relationship with Natalie, but opened the path to something infinitely better. I'd learned to trust my instincts instead of accepting gaslighting. I'd learned that love meant showing up consistently, not making excuses for bad behavior. I'd learned that the right person wouldn't make me feel crazy for expecting basic respect and honesty. Iris reached the altar and took my hands, and the officiant began the ceremony. I looked at the woman who'd been there through the worst of the investigation and aftermath, who'd offered practical help instead of empty sympathy, who'd been patient while I figured out how to be okay again. She'd loved me quietly for a year while I was with someone else, then loved me openly when I was finally ready to see what was right in front of me the whole time. We said our vows, and I promised to show up for her the way she'd shown up for me. I promised to be honest, even when it was difficult. I promised to build something real together instead of performing a relationship that looked good on the surface. Iris promised the same and added that she'd always tell me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it, because that's what love actually looked like. Everyone in the small gathering laughed because they knew she meant it. The reception was at Iris's favorite restaurant, the Italian place where she'd taken me for dinner the night after I confronted Natalie. We danced and ate too much cake and celebrated with people who genuinely cared about us. Leo showed up with his wife and joked that I was his favorite success story. He said most of his cases just ended in bitter divorces and custody battles, but mine had somehow led to actual happiness. I introduced him to Iris, and he told her she'd married a good one who knew how to handle hard truths. Later that evening, Iris and I stepped outside for some air away from the party noise. We stood under the lights of the restaurant parking lot, and she asked what I was thinking. I told her I was thinking about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago, how I'd been planning to propose to Natalie before finding that receipt, how I'd thought I was building a future with someone who was lying to me daily, how finding out the truth had felt devastating, but turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. Iris said she was glad I found that receipt when I did. She said if I'd proposed to Natalie, I might have married her before discovering the affair. I might have wasted years more before finally seeing the truth. She said sometimes the worst moments created space for the best possibilities. I agreed and kissed her, and we went back inside to our wedding reception full of people who'd supported us through chaos and celebrated us finding each other on the other side of it. That night, lying next to my wife in our hotel room, I finally felt completely free from the shadow of what Natalie had done. The betrayal had changed me, made me more cautious and more aware of red flags, but it hadn't broken me. I'd survived discovering that someone I loved had been lying to me for months. I'd confronted hard truths and demanded accountability. I'd moved forward instead of staying stuck, and I'd found someone who chose me honestly every single day instead of performing commitment while betraying me behind my back. Iris stirred next to me and asked if I was still awake. I said yes, and she asked what I was thinking about now. I told her I was thinking about how grateful I was for that hotel receipt, how it exposed a lie I'd been living and forced me to see reality, how it hurt terribly, but ultimately saved me from wasting more time on someone who didn't value me, how it led me here to this moment with her. Iris said she was grateful for it too, even though she hated watching me go through the pain. She said the receipt was just paper, but what I did with the information mattered more. I fell asleep next to my wife thinking about Natalie one last time, not with anger or regret, but with a strange kind of gratitude. She'd shown me exactly what I didn't want in a partner. She'd taught me to trust my instincts instead of accepting lies. She'd demonstrated through contrast what real love wasn't supposed to feel like. And by destroying what we had, she'd cleared space for something infinitely better with someone who'd been there all along. The woman who brought me coffee and helped me move and showed up every single day without fanfare or drama. The woman who loved me enough to tell me hard truths and stand beside me while I learned to demand better. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.